Alright guys, I'm back. It's Novice again, and I'm here with another video. Today's video is going to be hopefully short and brief. It's going to be about bash scripting. Now with bash scripting, we can separate those two words and pretty much define what they are. Bash is the command line interface of Linux. Now if you've ever worked with Windows, you probably heard of the command prompt or PowerShell. Bash is pretty much that, but for Linux. And then onto the scripting part. As we know, in bash you can run certain commands to do certain things. A script takes a good amount of commands and it works to achieve a certain goal. For example, in this video I'll give you an example of a bash script that I made to help to monitor certain systems, or to monitor the system that I have. Now for me personally, the reason I want to learn bash scripting, or am interested in diving deeper into it, is two. The first being in IT. I now have an IT role, so it's important for me to learn how to automate things, make my workflow faster, and pretty much it gives me the ability to touch a whole bunch of different things, and that's really good. On the ethical hacking side, I know there are a whole bunch of cool tools that can be built out using bash, because I've seen it in a whole bunch of places. They could range from super simple to super complex, but they're just super helpful overall. I'm also interested in using scripting as a platform to go deeper into coding. I know a little bit about coding, but not too much, and I do think scripting is like a little leeway to get me into coding. Alright, but enough about that. Let's talk about what you guys came here for, the actual bash script. Now before I actually show you guys what it is and explain deeper why I created it the way I created, let me explain what it's supposed to do. This bash script is supposed to collect disk space information, memory information, processing information, and finally the kernel version. Now I wanted to do these things to pretty much check up on the environment that I've set up, to make sure that nothing is exceeding in its capacity. Like I'm not using too much of my memory, I'm not using too much disk space, I'm not overloading the processor, just to make sure of things like that. Now there are certain parts of my code that I made specifically to try to alert me when those things happen, but I'll go deeper into them as I show you the code itself. And with this specific script, my plan was to use the cron tab, which I'll explain a little bit later on, to continuously run it. But I didn't do that because, well, I just wanted to show you guys how it was supposed to be used, and then I'll probably have it running in the background for if I actually do that. Now for the moment you guys have been waiting for, I present to you my system monitoring tool made with bash scripting. Alright guys, as promised, this is my bash scripting system monitoring tool. Now I'll go ahead and start by walking you guys through it so you guys can have a good understanding of how it works and why I wanted it to work that way. So of course you have to start with the shebang, exclamation part, /bin/bash, just lets you know what language you're working in. Then we move on to the fun stuff. So here we first have the check the CPU usage. Now this entire function is meant to check the CPU usage and then determine if the processing power that is being used, determine the available processing power that's being used, and determine if that's too little or if it's more than enough. Now the main command I used here was mpstat, so I'll show you guys that over here. Boom. Now this shows exactly what I wanted it to show. It shows the use of the processor in each of these categories. Now what I'm the most interested in and what I use in the code is this at the very end, 96.16. This is the idle processing power here, and this is what I need to know. That's the reason I used it in this code, because I knew that if I knew the idle processing power, I could know, oh, if it goes below this amount, I have too little processing power, which, coming back to the code, kind of shows here. So here I created a variable called less power, which I could then put into an if statement to print out text that lets me know what's going on with the CPU usage. Ooh, excuse me. So here we see MP stat, which we just did. Then it's meant to grep all, so it's going to grep this entire line right here. And then using the awk print 13, we're able to isolate this number right here. And the reason I did this cut was because the if statement needed a whole number. And so, yeah, I just decided to remove this so it would only be 96%. And then it would echo this. Now I'll show the entire code working at the end, but for right now I'll continue walking through the different functions and how they work and why they work the way I want them to. Next we have the memory check function. With the memory check function, instead of using MP stat, I use free-h, which gives information on, well, you guessed it, the memory. Boom. Here we can see the memory space, the total memory space, the amount that's used, the amount that's free, shared, buffer, and cache, and then we have the available. Now this is the one I'm interested in, and that's also represented by this line right here, the memory variable. Now in this code, I did free h, as you guys can see there, and then mem, I grepped the mem, grep this entire line, and then moving past that, I had this point. This was the part that I wanted and needed. I just needed this so I could know the amount of space that I still had available, so that I can then be alerted when that goes too low, which then goes into a whole bunch of these other variables. Now these variables were used by me to figure out a few things about the actual value that I obtained. The first was the character num, which comes into play with these next two variables. So this just takes the amount of characters within the num, or with the amount of characters within the string, and then gives me the number. Now from there, I use gigabytes or megabytes. The purpose of this variable is to determine whether the last two characters at the end are either gig or mega. Once that's figured out, I can then use it in the if statement later on, which I'll explain later. So then we have the num here, which then represents the amount that's taken after the gig is taken off, or the amount that's used prior to the gig statement right here. Then using whole number, I pretty much do something similar to what I did prior, and I just create a whole number. So I just remove this 0.8 to make the whole number 2. Now then comes the if statement, which is the most interesting part to me. Here I pretty much just wanted to make sure that I was using the same measuring stick for each of the available spaces. Like say I had really low memory space and it was in the megabytes. I wanted this code to translate that into just bytes. So it translates gigabytes to bytes and megabytes to bytes. So I can then compare the two no matter what. And that is pretty much this entire if statement. Now with the gigabytes, I said to print the gigabytes in bytes and how much is available. And then I just said to print there's enough memory. If I have a gigabyte, that's enough memory for me, honestly speaking. Then in the else if, I pretty much made it so that if I believe I had, I think it was 10 megabytes, below 10 megabytes, that's when the memory was low, and then otherwise it's enough. And that's pretty much the end of that piece of code right there. And then let me scroll down a little. Like I said, I also include the kernel version. This portion I included because to make this code, I kind of got the idea from watching other people who did it, and I was like, that would still be an interesting part to throw in here, because it was a code or a command I had never used before, the uname. So let me just run that right now, because honestly that's the extent that I used it to. I didn't have to do too much here because it just printed out the kernel version and boom, there it is. And then finally we have the disk space. Now honestly speaking, if you're looking closely enough, it's more, I don't want to use the word rip off, but it's a remodeling of the memory check function. So here we can see that we have echo disk space. However, instead of using the free-h, we use the df-h, which shows the disk information instead of the memory information. So the memory or the disk that we're interested in is this one, because this is where we're going to reside for most of our things. So I reflected that in the code, in the script. So here we can see it's -dev-sda1. And here I'm always looking for the amount of space available in this case. So like I said, I ran through something similar. I got the number of characters within the available disk space, so that I can separate it into gigabytes and megabytes and the actual number itself. Then I actually went through, cut the whole number off, so in this case it would just be 37 gigs. This one was just to make it into an integer from a string. And then finally we kind of ran through the same thing we did prior, except at the very end, because I also noticed that there was some using kilobytes. I said else the disk space is too low, because if I'm just remaining in kilobytes, especially for disk space, that's way too low for anything. Now finally I'm going to run the entire script, so that it's going to print most of this out, and then it's going to display the alerts that I wanted it to display based on what's happening right here. So for the most part, everything's working properly, so it should say there's more than enough processing power, there's more than enough memory, give the kernel version, and it should say there's more than enough disk space. So let's go ahead and run that really quick. Boom. Excuse me. Okay. Here we have the information for the memory space. Here we have the information for the processing power. Now, I'm still confused on this error right here. I got it previously, but let me show you guys why I'm confused on it. If I come in here and I simply comment out the rest of these, it works perfectly. Then we'll actually run in this one since I now have it. Boom. And here you can even see the bytes available and that there is enough disk space. This part still confuses me. It doesn't run as a whole, but it runs when it's by itself. So I'll dig into that deeper. But to make a long story short, it runs as I expected it to. It runs giving me the information that I needed. And yeah, from here, this is my disk tool. Other than that, I have nothing else to add. So I thank you guys for watching. If you like the video, like the video. And if you want to support me, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Novice out. Peace.